I never talked to somebody who went through RCIA. How did they come to those classes? Or friends sometimes or whatever. Somebody. Now, wait a second. Now let's keep digging. Because, and I'm just picking on you because you made the comment. The truth is I think everyone was nodding their head. So obviously you all can relate to something similar. At first you said we just put a notice out there, people who want to learn more about their faith. But now you just said, but actually it's usually a spouse, a friend, a coworker, a neighbor. I mean, whatever. They all have a different story. But it was a person who began a conversation for whatever reason with them. And they talked about stuff long before they ever considered coming into a class, right? That's, by the way, not a small part of the equation. In fact, our documents say it's the essential part. There was time for what we call the period of inquiry. It's a building up of trust. That I come to you and I talk about, I know you go to church and God, you seem really happy and I don't know if it's not really for, oh, you should come. Oh my gosh, you would love it here. Or we have a fish fry, or Father Mark is great, or oh my gosh, you got to meet Sister so-and-so, or oh, the adult people are great, or the family ministry is wonderful, your kids would love, right? Whatever it is. And then usually the first response is what? No, right? Because almost everybody says no initially. But then eventually, you talk again, and then you maybe talk a third time, and then you grab a cup of coffee together, and then something maybe happens that triggers it to come to the forefront, and all of a sudden they're like, hey, you asked me one time about coming, like, is that going on? Like, I think I might want to do that. And then they come to something, right? And then they look at it, and then maybe somewhere there they saw something in the bulletin, and then they go back to their friend or their spouse or whatever and said, I've been kind of kicking this around. Like, what do you think of that, right? Like, isn't that really the process? And our church said that's actually the process we should use for everything. For everything. Which will require a couple things then, right? It requires that people are engaging in those kind of conversations. Wait a second, let's go back to this part now. See how these fit together? That people will respond to witnesses before teachers. In our model, we think that if we put something in a bulletin and people respond to it, let's put them into a class, we're functioning in a teacher model. Register for a class, come here, and you'll be engaged, when the reality is our church has been telling us for over 50 years, that's not the best model. Therefore, people need to be equipped to come to know their own story, to then have their own spiritual conversion in their lives rather than just showing up, so that I can then begin to feel confident and understand my baptized responsibility is not to go to Mass, but to help someone else on their journey. The Mass is the fulfillment of an interior conversion. Well, let's dig into what our own church told us to do, and let's see how we're matching up there, right? So I'm literally today, if you haven't picked up on it, I'm literally walking you through an abridged version of change management. And the first thing you do is awareness. None of these are my ideas. I got no original material here. I'm quoting the church. And the church told us to do it one way, but what you're starting to see is, but we're not doing that. Well, what if we would pay attention to that? Maybe that's why we have clergy shortage. Maybe that's why young people are not coming to church. Maybe that's why families are not here. And remember, what is the source of all of our church documents? How do they get written? Someone sits in a back room and just thinks up this stuff? See, we believe very strongly, we are a church that honors those documents because they are divinely inspired. Do you know anything about how any of those documents come about? I've been a reviewer on a few of them. They're fascinating. The National Directory of Catechesis I happen to be a part of. There was thousands of people, it wasn't just me, that all got to review that and send in our comments. Now think about it this way. Just here in this diocese, would you say that we have a diverse church? That there are people who would love to be more expressive in their worship, and there are people who would like to have more high mass and everything in between. And we're just talking about liturgy at this point. Would you agree with that in your diocese? Is that what you find? Yeah. You know, or if we got to use secular terms where people talk about the liberal and the conservative or the progressive and the traditional or whatever. I don't care. I'm not a big term person, but it helps people frame it, right? Even in this diocese, would you say that you're all over the board? There are parishes that meet that, yes, right? Which, by the way, is part of the challenge of bringing these parishes together, right? And so we're all over the board, and everybody is convinced that this is the right way to do church, right? Which, by the way, is exactly why Paul wrote all those letters to all those people. People of Corinth were arguing over the right way to be church. Not much has changed. Can you imagine putting all those people in one room together and say we need to come up with a document on how we're supposed to teach, or how we're supposed to do worship, or how we're supposed to interact with an ecumenical relations? I mean, that's what's fascinating about the Second Vatican Council. Not only can you have a hard time coming up with how to do it, you have people in the room that don't even think you should be doing it. And we can write an initial draft, and after several edits, it can get whittled down and whittled down and whittled down, and suddenly what's produced, which typically is years later, are these documents. I can tell you I saw one of the early drafts of the National Directory for Catechesis, the American version of how we're supposed to teach, and I was part of that committee. It looks absolutely nothing like what is in the book that you purchased. It looks nothing like that. Chapters are different. How it was structured and organized is different. The content is different. Like, it's completely different. And yet we look at it and we're like, this is flipping genius, because we believe in divine inspiration, that it's the Spirit that will guide us. We have to get our egos out of the way. That's why we spend so much time studying these documents, or we're supposed to. Where do you begin that change? Let's get our staff studying the documents. Let's get our pastoral councils, our finance councils studying those documents. Because if we understand what we're supposed to do, we can engage in lively conversation about what we should be doing. And that's the beginning of how you turn this thing.